everybody. Welcome back to Live for Queers, the corner of the internet where I talk to you about books. And as you can see today, I am not by myself. I have my dear friend Meret here, and we're going to talk about bisexuality erasure. And the reason why I asked Meret to be here is because she did a wonderful thesis about this particular topic last year. And we're both bisexual, and we kind of had this as a starting point of our friendship as well, in a way. But then I went into something more political for my thesis, whereas she picked this wonderful topic and she talked about bisexuality erasure in the context of Heartstopper. So I know a lot of you will recognize Heartstopper, so I will give the floor to her to talk to us a little bit more about her research and then we can chat a bit. Go.
Sounds good. Yeah, this is exciting. I'm always happy to yap about my favorite topic in the world, which is bisexuality and queer media representation. Yeah, it's been a while now. We submitted our theses last year, so it's really nice to revisit this topic a year on. So yeah, very
Almost to the
excited for
day,
this.
isn't it? It
Is
was,
it?
well, like a couple weeks maybe.
Wow.
I know. But yeah, go on.
What should I say? Where should I start?
Okay, why don't you talk to us about why did you pick Heartstopper as a particular medium to analyze and what else did you start with?
hmm I think the interest in how bisexuality is portrayed in the media came first. So if you're asking me what came first, the chicken or the egg, I would say it was that first. And in our first year of uni, I did a study on bisexuality and its media representation in general. And through those interviews that I did with the bisexual audience, Heartstopper always came up as a positive example of bisexual representation. And I was already a big fan of Heartstopper to begin with, but I think I kind of merged my fan interest with my interest as a researcher in my thesis. And I thought looking at a well-received example of bisexual representation is also a good way to point out why other examples of bisexual representation haven't been as well received and why bi erasure is still a thing. You can kind of look at it from both ways. I could have analyzed a really poor example of bi representation, but I chose to go for the one that is sort
Mhm.
of more commonly named as the example that the bisexual audience, especially the one that I interviewed, just received really well and thought of as a good and a nuanced example.
Why do you think it took so long to get to the point where we have a good representation of bisexuality specifically?
I think it's a general societal issue of being uncomfortable with in-betweenness and struggling with things that aren't black or white, that aren't straight or gay. I think there's a general sort of hesitation around in-between categories, and people like things in neat little boxes and categories. So I think that's why it took so long. And in general, since we'll be talking about bisexual erasure, there's this tendency in society to just completely erase the idea of a stable bisexual identity that is as valid as a straight or gay identity.
Yeah. What were the people saying the most? The people that you interviewed? Why do you think everybody kind of came across Heartstopper? Do you think it was mainly because of the bisexuality? Do you think they knew that beforehand that it was going to be a good representation, or was it just am I maybe going to get a crumble of it?
Mhm. I think most of them had either specifically sought out a queer series or it was recommended to them. So it kind of also showed this queer tendency to share things, which obviously fits very well with your channel,
Yeah.
that we like to share the things that we're interested in and we like to sort of tell all our queer friends about the representation that we have found. And I think the people that I interviewed were pleasantly surprised because I think even in more recent examples of bisexual representation, you might still have some of these typical pitfalls. You might still have stereotypes being sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Perpetuated,
Yeah.
even though we've come a long way. And I think what Heartstopper does especially well in the second season is that it addresses bisexual erasure, it addresses stereotypes, it addresses all the things that bi people know all too well. And I think that's why it resonated so much with such a wide audience.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I loved Heartstopper when it came out. I did read the graphic novels before, so I knew how it was, or I hoped that it was going to be as good. But like, talk to us more about identity and what it represented, what having somebody that actually stood up for their own identity meant to your interviewees.
Yeah, so I interviewed 12 people, about 8 women, 2 men, and 2 non-binary people who all identified as either bi, pan, queer, or didn't even label their sexuality, but experience attraction to multiple genders. And I would say what resonated across the board to all of them, regardless of gender, regardless of other life circumstances, was this idea of relief from seeing someone who went through the same thing as them. So, especially in season 1, we see Nick questioning a lot and kind of going down this rabbit hole of not knowing where he fits in and feeling like this new thing that he's discovered about himself is almost at odds with who he is as a person. And the feeling of not knowing and the feeling of uncertainty around it was something that really resonated with the people that I interviewed. And then in season 2, this ongoing struggle of people perceiving Nick either as gay, as gay through
Yeah.
his relationship with Charlie, or if they don't know about Charlie, as straight just by default because we perceive people as straight unless they tell us otherwise, and kind of showing this being really torn between these two things that are seemingly oppositional, being straight Nick and being gay Nick, when he is neither, when he is bisexual Nick.
Yeah.
So I think to the audience, um, what felt really true to them is this feeling of being torn, and this feeling of constantly having to articulate their sexuality, because bisexuality is seen as not a visible identity because we like to categorize people based on who they're with, or based on how they dress, or based on how they conduct themselves. And then we put them either in the straight box or in the gay box. And I think what resonated with them was consistently and continuously having to say, I'm bi actually, and having to come out all the time. I think that's what really stood out in Heartstopper.
I think from what you're saying, for me, it's really interesting the fact that to this day we seem to want to, like, obviously people are made up of a lot of different parts, and the fact that it's really interesting when it comes to like harmless things like sexuality, or that I believe harmless, harmless things like sexuality and what you like doing as a hobby, and who, like, the type of person that you are, almost as if your sexuality must exclude something else. Like what you're saying about being at odds, I think for me, maybe that was always something that I couldn't really relate to, in the sense that for me it was just one more piece of the puzzle that kind of fit together, instead of being this thing of, oh, I am very girly, I feel like I couldn't be a lesbian if I was a lesbian. I know that maybe when it's more defined, or maybe if you do fall in love with somebody of the same gender, or that makes you question more things, then maybe I would have felt more at odds with certain parts of myself. But it's really interesting to see how, to this day, like something as simple and something as natural, or I believe as natural as your interests and what subjects you like at school and whatever, can be such at odds with each other, or you perceive them to be such at odds. And at the same time, I think what they did very well is the fact that they picked a teenager for
Mhm.
this. Because maybe if they had picked somebody a little bit older, they wouldn't have felt like I don't know, maybe the process wouldn't have been like, oh, I feel very much at odds, between torn between this part of my identity and the other, instead of seeing how they can fit together.
Yeah, and I think for me also what resonated with Nick's experience is that only when he is exposed to other queer people and queer friendly people, only then does he feel safe to explore. And I think that's also part of bi erasure, just simply not being around people that openly identify as bi. It almost makes you think that it doesn't exist as a sexuality. And then when you're around queer people, and then it gives you the freedom and the space to explore and to reevaluate who you are in the context of sexuality. And I think it gives you more freedom to combine all those different aspects of your identity, without feeling like I'm a rugby lad. There's no way that I could be queer.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that I really related to when it comes to Nick, because my own experience of finding out that I am bi was, I guess, kind of similar to Nick in the sense that I went to an all-girls school in the UK. And there were a lot of queer girls around me, and that allowed me to explore the possibility of being queer myself. When in my, let's call it, very straight environment back at home in Germany, I didn't feel like it was something I could safely explore. It almost didn't cross my mind.
Yeah. I think sometimes there's that thing of like you not actively repressing it, but because you don't come into contact with media or like with anything that even makes you, aware of what the possibilities are. Because I feel like when we grew up, so we're from the same year. So we were born in 1998. So when we grew up, like when we were teenagers, like those roles, those characters that didn't have like the best representation, if you look back on them, um, we're just starting to emerge. Like I still remember the first couple of queer characters that I saw on television, and these were in, like maybe 2009, 2010,
Mhm.
like, things that weren't like, if you look back at those storylines, you would be looking at like, maybe that wasn't so great, but that's what they could do at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's very interesting that I think that's in the end what we are doing, like what we did with our masters and why we did work on representation, because there's a lot of people out there that wonder what the heck are you doing? Like, why study media? Why does it matter? And like going over your thesis again, like it was the GLAD report, there was like only 10% of characters were queer
Yeah.
in TV shows and like media. So like even the people that are now like, oh, like there's gotta be a gay character everywhere. Almost as if they don't even know queer people and
Yeah.
their own storylines don't involve queerness at all, which is impossible to this day unless you live in the middle of nowhere. But, even in my tiny village of 800 people, there's queer people,
Yeah,
you know.
you're there.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm there, but also, growing up, like after I came out, like it just like it started expanding. And like,
Yeah.
oh, I noticed this person, I noticed this person, and the elderly guy who never got married and he's very eccentric. So, maybe. Um, but I think that's also why it's very interesting. So like, do you want to tell us more about what people said about representation and what it made them feel like?
hmm Yeah, there was an interesting, almost generational divide where some of the older people, meaning late 20s,
Yeah.
I think the oldest person I interviewed was maybe in their early 30s. So oldest, they felt the way that you and I feel, I would say, that there wasn't a lot of representation out there, that you really had to specifically look for it, that the representation you could find was riddled with stereotypes of bisexuals being cheaters and unfaithful and not worthy. And if they were women, they were just experimenting and having fun and doing it for the male gaze. And if they were men, it was just a layover on their way to Gay Town. Um, and then the younger participants who were maybe in the early 20s, so we're talking about maybe like a 10-year age gap, were telling me that they discovered queer representation really early on and that they were also exposed to nuances in labeling their sexuality early on. I had a participant who said she just found the word pansexual and it fit, and that was it for her. And that's an experience that I think you and I maybe didn't have, that we just suddenly came across this label and we were like, okay, yeah, cool, that's me. And that was it. I think you and I probably went through more of a similar thing like Nick did with like a whole like little crisis of taking am I gay quizzes and not really knowing where you fit in. So I think it really shows that within a pretty short span of time, we've managed to have at least more accessible representation across the board, where younger people have an easier time finding it and stumbling across it and see it as kind of like an integral part of media today. Um, so I think that was really interesting. And then what made my bisexual heart really happy was just the relief that they experienced from seeing Nick as an authentic, nuanced, multifaceted bisexual character who didn't fall into those stereotypes. And they felt like it was someone who felt really true in a way and real and like an actual human being. And his bisexuality wasn't a plot device. It wasn't there to create some sort of like
Drama.
excitement, yeah, or drama, exactly. So I think that was just really heartwarming to see.
Mhm.
Um, and I think there was one participant in particular who said that watching Heartstopper made her realize that she was queer. So
Mhm.
it also shows that if you see people who resemble you, whose experience resembles yours, it might open your eyes,
Mhm.
which I guess maybe supports the idea of the gay agenda that watching queer TV will make you gay. But I watched a lot of straight TV and a lot of straight films when I was a kid, and I turned out queer anyway, so I don't think that's how the media works.
I was thinking back on what you said about what you just said about having the freedom to kind of explore once you feel safe in an environment. And I think that's also like what confuses people a lot, like outside the community. I think what is good about the community when it works, when it works, because it's not like the queer community is perfect by any means, but is the fact that we understand, like the majority of us understands that there is this fluidity
Yeah,
to both sexuality and gender. And I'll say this gender to a certain point because some people have a harder time wrapping their heads around that. Um, but I know that this, as you said before, like bisexuality is a stable identity, but from the outside, it does not look stable.
yeah,
It does not, or it's not perceived as stable. It's perceived as fluid. And I think, as you said, like it's confusing for people not within the community and who are not thinking about this quite a lot, that something can be fluid.
yeah,
Something so innate, such as sexuality, can be fluid and can change, which is why I think a lot of the times people might get invalidated if they change their labels or if they change pronouns and it's not a stable thing because it could be that you start off thinking one thing and then you're kind of like putting barriers up or like in different places and you're understanding different things. I mean, we saw with Chapel Roan as well. I know that she identified as bisexual and that she came out as a lesbian, and there was a lot of chaos around that, as if people can't figure out other elements of themselves. And I think that's one of the most wonderful parts of the community, that people do understand or try to understand that it is fluid. But bisexuality, if you decide it to be, does not have to be fluid.
yeah.
Like it can be stable, But as you said, we are uncomfortable with gray areas.
Yeah,
With yeah, it's
definitely.
it's interesting. And I don't know if you got the chance to read the article that I sent over. No.
Not yet.
Oh,
I'm so
yeah.
sorry.
No, that's fine. But like, I think it's again, it's one of those things that makes you think like how cyclical the things are. Like this was an article that I read, and it was written in the 1990s, and it's called for people. This it's called "What's Wrong with Normal." And from the title, you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, I have to defend my identity all throughout this article while I'm reading it. But no, it's actually about like kind of the juxtaposition of like bad gays and good gays. And
Mm,
this was in the 90s.
yeah.
And we still have this conception of like people distancing themselves from promiscuity and even bisexuality because it's so confusing to others. Because it's like, well, if you're bisexual, then you must be having a lot of sex, like you must be jumping from person to person, like it's not stable. And like
Hmm.
that article in particular was warning against that and against, kind of splitting the community up between people that refuse to engage in any type of political action to appease kind of the more respectable crowds of heterosexuals.
Yeah.
And then you have the people that still kind of focus on the resistance part of queerness, of like, just do whatever you want in safety, whatever it is. But then it's also like, who is acceptable
Yes.
within our community? And I
Yeah.
think we're seeing that a lot now with trans people and non-binary people, like the entire media and cultural war on these groups. And I thought it was very interesting, even in like talking about bisexuality and how it's not considered a stable identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the most heartbreaking thing that I took away from my thesis work and my research was that 12 out of 12 people that I interviewed said that they felt like there were hierarchies within the community. They didn't feel queer enough. They thought that they hadn't had enough experience, that they hadn't engaged in enough activity that they classified as being queer
Mhm.
to warrant the label of bisexuality or to warrant their place in the queer community.
Yeah.
I interviewed a couple of women with male partners, and they kept saying that they felt uncomfortable bringing their male partners to Pride or bringing them into queer spaces because they felt like it was somehow diminishing their queerness. And as someone who has also felt like she wasn't queer enough growing up, it completely broke my heart just hearing that that's such a common experience. And there's research around it, and there's research dating back to decades ago that already addressed this problem of bisexuality being sort of like the odd one out when it comes to sexuality and queerness, and being the sexuality that is placed on the lowest rung, that
Mhm.
is, even though, of course, gay men and lesbian women are heavily marginalized and they often experience violence sort of openly at a higher rate, we do see that the problem with bisexuality really is the erasure, the fact that we talk about it as if it doesn't exist, and therefore invalidate it as an identity, and therefore we invalidate bisexual people's queerness, and this is also heavily based on their gender. So if you're a woman, you're more likely to be, as I said, so seen as someone who's experimenting, whereas as a bisexual man, you're more likely to be seen as gay and just in denial, and you just can't admit to yourself that you're fully gay.
Yeah.
And therefore, we create these hierarchies, which, together with heteronormativity and compulsory heterosexuality, creates this idea that not only is it better to be straight, it is better to be straight or gay than to be
Yeah.
bisexual.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really uncomfortable topic to talk about because I do not want to sound like I'm throwing a gigantic pity party for bisexual people and I'm trying to somehow make us out as a more marginalized group than other groups within the queer community. That is by no means what I'm trying to say. But I think there's a very specific erasure and discrimination that is happening towards bisexual people that needs more academic attention, more media attention, and more personal attention for people to realize what is happening. So I
Yeah.
think something like 95% of bisexual people experience discrimination at work because of their
Mhm.
sexuality. The numbers for gay men and lesbian women are much lower. Even the numbers for trans people are lower, which is absolutely heartbreaking to think that bisexual people experience the most discrimination at work out of these groups. None of them should be discriminated against in any way, but I think it shows that we're not often aware
Mhm.
of how much the bisexual community has suffered and continues to suffer, even within their own ranks, within the queer community. And I think the erasure of bisexuality is so prominent that even today, in the year 2025, I still come across articles, news posts, whatever that mentions the LGBTQ plus community and then proceeds to talk about gays, lesbians, and trans people.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Where
of
are we?
course,
Where
yeah,
are we?
exactly. Where are we? And of course, there are so many more letters that deserve to be in the acronym, which is why over the years I've come to sort of prefer talking about the queer community as
Yeah.
a whole, even though I don't want to dismiss any individual experiences based on how you label your sexuality or your gender, of course. But I think it must be possible that we can talk about nuance depending on how you identify and also see the commonalities and we can stick together and stand up for each other. There must be a way.
I think we struggle with nuances with a lot of discourse. Our attention span is just lower, and it makes it more difficult for us to grasp the nuances of literally every single concept, like from the concept of race and ethnicities to gender. Like it's got to be black and white. It's got to be one experience or the other. And even if people don't fit into those particular experiences, because sometimes stereotypes come from somewhere.
Sure.
Somebody could be a full-on walking stereotype,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean that they deserve something less and something different. And what I feel like it's really interesting is like recently I've read an article where it's basically like, again, it was a quite an old article, like from the years we were born. And it was basically like there's a sexuality hierarchy.
Yeah.
There is. And at the time, like queerness was completely like not in the acceptance part of it. Like it, I think it called it a sort of dominoes or something like that. Um, and like any queer act would have put you in a different category altogether. But what the article was saying as well was we're getting closer to have gay and lesbian acts on the other side of the wall. But anything that doesn't that wouldn't fit like a specific gay and lesbian act, so like usually white, usually like respectable and like presenting in a certain way, that wouldn't confuse too much. Then we can put them on the other side. Like I have family members that are totally okay with gay and lesbian people. And then when it comes to more nuanced representations of literally anything, it's chaos.
Yeah.
It's confusion. It's you're breaking the concept apart. And then it's like it's a whole thing of like, have you ever heard of that? Oh, but if they only acted this way, I would
Yes.
be fine with them.
Yes.
It's like if they passed in a certain way, or why do they have to act a certain way? And it's like it's almost as if we were all born into society with these little boxes in front of us. And like if you look a certain way, if you are a certain way, then it's just one straight line to like what you have to be and what you have to look like and what you have to do and behave. And like in reality, and that's always how I try to explain like gender differences. It's like yes, we have sex and we have gender. And our sex, like I place it in like a little box. And basically what we did from the beginning of time is like we draw a line and this is how you have to perform your gender.
Yeah.
But it's not that way anymore. That's not how we grasp the concept of gender anymore. But as I said with you already, like if we break apart these concepts, like we're breaking apart society. We are.
Of course. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why people are so resistant. It's
Yeah.
not just religion. It's a fundamental societal thing, which is why, like it's our subjects that are getting defunded a lot of
Yeah.
the that are getting less attention because it's easier to kind of overlook how the breaking down of these concepts is going to affect society because it's scary for people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's super important what you said about assimilating into heterosexual concepts, culture, ideas, because it creates almost a homonormativity that
Mhm.
exists alongside heteronormativity. So then, if you are queer, you must also follow this kind of normative ideal of what a queer person should be. And then, if you don't align with that, even if your identity doesn't align with what you expect of a queer person, then it leaves you outside of that again. And I think it's such a dangerous thing to want everyone to assimilate into a certain way of life, because at the end of the day, your life is your life, and it shouldn't matter to you how someone else lives theirs. And before we started talking, I was thinking about what is sort of like, what would the world look like that I would like to live in terms of when it comes to identity, especially sexuality or gender identity. And I was thinking, I just want there to be agency over deciding whether and how you label your sexuality. I want there to be empathy for individual experiences. And I want there to be an understanding of nuance,
Mhm.
that we move away from meeting someone, and let's say someone meets me
Yeah,
and my girlfriend. They assume that because I
so with a
introduce
girl.
Nina
Yeah,
as my girlfriend, they think we're lesbians. And I want them to move to a place where they don't necessarily immediately put us into that box, where they kind of just leave it as here are two women dating.
yeah,
And if then I go on to say, oh, by the way, I'm bisexual, that is just accepted and it is not questioned. Because
yes,
then I have agency, and then they have they have empathy for my experience of how I see the world. Um, so I think that's sort of what I would like the world to move towards. Because at the end of the day, we're human beings and the world is very complicated and we need categories. It is, I think, maybe utopic to think of a world that does not have
yeah,
any categories at all. But I think it would already be better, and it would already be so much more, uh, we would have a more livable society for a lot of groups if we just stopped assuming immediately.
yeah,
And if we just believed people, if someone tells us, these are my pronouns, this is my sexuality, this is my identity, we just leave it at that and we believe them. And I
yeah.
think that's the world that I want to move towards.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that you have to kind of ignore the like because obviously if we did that without any critical thinking, our subjects would not exist, our majors would not exist, right? Like
Yeah,
the queer studies and gender studies like that kind of look at the societal level and like what identity means and all of that wouldn't exist the same way. But it would create a better world. It would create a world where we can ask and people are free to answer or not, and it doesn't impact you. It doesn't
yeah,
impact your existence. And yeah, I would say like the meeting's about to be finished.
yeah.
And this is where I stumble, so that's okay. I'll edit this out. I think we can leave it at this because I think we ended it on a beautiful note. I think what you just said was beautiful of how we're going to be striving to be. And thank you again for being on
Oh,
the channel. I will
my
have you
pleasure.
back for something else to yap about
Please.
queerness. But in the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation and that we can have a little discussion in the comments and see what you think about bisexuality and bisexuality erasure, and if you have anything else to add to the conversation. Bye.